Good morning to you. It's 7 o'clock. You're watching the only breakfast show live from Westminster. Now, we'll have the very latest as the UK sends 2 Royal Navy ships to Jersey as a fishing row with France ramps up. Plus, pencils at the ready. We're off to the polling booth in the largest test of public opinion outside of a general election. Also this morning, looking after your maternal mental health. We'll talk to the TV presenter Ashley James, who's campaigning to raise awareness of the struggles of becoming a mum. That's at 10 to 9 this morning. And the Augmented Art Gallery of the Future. At 9:30, we'll talk to the actor and presenter Stephen Mangan about the launch of an interactive art trail in London's West End. It's Thursday, May the 6th. Troubled waters. 2 Royal Navy patrol vessels are sent to Jersey after France threatens to blockade the island's main port in a row over fishing rights. Super Thursday. Millions set to cast their ballots for the biggest set of UK elections outside a general election in almost 50 years. The battle against coronavirus. New research from Israel which suggests vaccinations rather than lockdowns are the key to reducing infections. Meanwhile, there's no quick fix, a warning that long COVID clinics will need to be around for much longer than the current funding allows, with thousands already being treated. Fueling a backlash, calls for a boycott of the London Science Museum's climate exhibition sponsored by the oil giant Shell.
And it's becoming wet and windy this weekend, but milder conditions are on the way. Until then, it's looking cool and showery once again for today. I'll have the details for you later in the programme.
Well, a very good morning to you. The UK is sending 2 Royal Navy ships to Jersey as a precaution after France threatened to blockade the main port and cut power to the island over a post-Brexit fishing row. The Prime Minister has said any blockade would be completely unjustified, as reports suggest up to 100 French fishing boats were preparing to sail to the island later today to demonstrate against Jersey's issuing of fishing licences. Milena Veselinovic reports.
The feud between the UK and France over fishing rights escalated after French fishermen threatened to blockade Jersey's main port. In response, 2 Royal Navy ships were ordered to waters off the island. On Wednesday night, the PM spoke to Jersey's Chief Minister and the Minister for External Relations, and in a statement Downing Street said the Prime Minister underlined his unwavering support for Jersey. He said that any blockade would be completely unjustified. As a precautionary measure, the UK will be sending 2 offshore patrol vessels to monitor the situation. France accuses Jersey of imposing extra conditions on fishing licences, which it claims is in breach of the Brexit agreement. But Jersey authorities say that some French vessels simply didn't have the correct documents to get their permits.
We believe that the licences we've issued are respectful of the Brexit agreement. The question is whether those French vessels have provided the full amount of evidence that they need to respect their historic rights. In some of those boats, it's now become apparent that they've not provided all of that evidence, and we are absolutely prepared to give those vessels extra time to provide that evidence.
On Tuesday, the French Maritime Minister threatened to cut electricity supply to Jersey, which gets nearly all its power from France. But island authorities say that's likely an empty threat, because they have a commercial contract with an energy company and could fire up the island's own power station. But this row continues to brew, and it seems that neither side is willing to back down yet. Milena Veselinovic, Sky News.
Well, let's talk to our political correspondent, Rob Powell. I mean, this is certainly heating up, Rob.
Yeah, I mean, it's not unusual necessarily for Royal Navy vessels to be involved in fishing protection. They've done that for a very long time. Jersey is a Crown dependency. Obviously, the UK has some defence foreign policy obligations towards it. But of course, it's the context that makes this interesting, the context of Brexit and the context of those threats from France. You can see there a maritime tracker map which shows French vessels that left overnight from the Normandy coast that are arriving in St Helier, the main port in Jersey, right now. I think the little flashing dot off the coast of Jersey, you can see that is HMS 7 that arrived in the early hours of this morning. HMS Tamar as well is due to arrive in Jersey, but doesn't seem to have arrived there yet. Now, why this has all happened now is because there had been a kind of buffer period, an interim period, where French ships were allowed access to Jersey waters as they had done when we were within the EU. That ran out on Friday and a new licensing regime came in. 40 or so French ships were given licences to fish, 17 or so haven't yet had those licences granted. The French say that they're being asked for information that is unnecessary. The Jersey authorities say that they simply haven't provided the necessary data yet. I think the French are also unhappy about what they see as new restrictions being put on them over and above where they were able to fish before. So while this is new, actually it comes against a backdrop of tension. You had Jersey fishermen blockading that very same port back in March, protesting over how they were being treated by the French. So I think maybe more indication that those two thorny issues during the Brexit negotiations of fishing and of Northern Ireland, from what we've seen in the last few months, they haven't just vanished because we've left the EU.
OK, Rob, thank you. Now, millions of Britons are casting their votes today for the largest set of elections outside of a general election in 50 years. The Scottish and Welsh people voting in their parliamentary elections, which happen every 5 years, and voters in England setting their sights on the mayoral contest and the Hartlepool parliamentary by-election. Here's our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, with more.
Now, this may not be a general election, but these polls and the results could prove incredibly important across much of Britain. But before we get to that, let's take a moment to consider what's going on. And the short answer is quite a lot, actually. There are, depending on how you count it, actually 7 or 8 separate things happening here. So, first of all, you've got the Scottish and Welsh Parliament elections. They happen every 5 years. There's the English Council elections, the local elections. In this case, there's actually 2 years' worth of them bundled into one because last year's were cancelled due to COVID. You've got the London Assembly elections and the vote for the London Mayor. Those were also postponed. And you've got another 12 elected mayors across various metropolitan and regional areas of England. You've got police and crime commissioner elections too. And as if that weren't all enough, you've also got a parliamentary by-election to elect a new MP for Hartlepool. To make it more complicated, I'm afraid, many of these different elections involve slightly different voting systems. So Hartlepool, that's simple. As with general elections, the candidate with the most votes wins. But the Scottish and Welsh elections, they involve something called the additional member system. You vote once for a candidate in your local constituency and a second time for a party. Those second votes go towards a regional list of members of these parliaments. It's a form of proportional representation, the idea being to ensure that smaller parties get represented in the parliaments, and it makes getting a majority very difficult indeed, though not impossible. The additional member system, that's also used for the London Assembly election, but not for the London Mayor. That election uses a different voting system, the supplementary vote, where you choose a first and a second choice candidate. It's not proportional representation, but it's designed to find a candidate who most people either want or kind of want. Same system, supplementary vote for the directly elected mayors elsewhere around the UK and the police and crime commissioners too. You get the idea. 7 or 8 elections, 3 different voting systems, 3 days, maybe more, of counting as we start to piece together the latest picture of politics around Great Britain.
Well, don't forget, we'll bring you all the results live right here on Sky News, starting with a special programme from midnight tonight through into Friday, and we'll bring you the results of the Hartlepool by-election and all the others as they come in, with full coverage continuing here on Breakfast tomorrow. Now, a new study from Israel has shown that 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine can provide more than 95% protection against infection, severe illness and death from COVID-19. New cases have dropped dramatically since the country's vaccination programme began, from a peak of more than about 10,000 a day in January to a few hundred in March, when lockdown was eventually lifted. Well, let's get the latest from Enda Brady, who's in the newsroom. I mean, these certainly are very positive results, Enda.
They are, Stephen, a very significant study. This is the first kind of real detail we've had from the Israeli vaccination programme. It's from their Ministry of Health. It's published in The Lancet today. And I think scientists all over the world will be looking at this because Israel has used exclusively the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, and it was supplied on the understanding that data from the Israeli vaccination programme will be published to demonstrate efficacy of that particular vaccine. What it shows us is that 2 doses gives 95% protection against infection, severe illness and death. A single jab, 58% protection against infection, 76% protection against hospital admission and 77% protection against death. And Israel currently leading the world with 56% of its population fully vaccinated against COVID-19. Now, in January of this year, they were still in lockdown there. They were reporting 10,000 cases a day, but they came out of lockdown in March, and that number had dropped down to just a few hundred cases per day. So Israel really showing the world how a vaccination programme can be implemented, and we're seeing now the benefits of how they have done it, and just ultimately a roadmap out of COVID. Experts saying that this study really shows the vaccines work and ultimately will be the path to dealing with the pandemic and basically getting it over and done with.
OK, Enda, thank you. Well, let's have a look at the latest COVID figures for the UK. There have been 2,144 new cases of coronavirus in the last 24 hours. 27 more deaths have been reported, which means the total number of people who've died within 28 days of a positive test is now 127,570. 127,170 people have had their first vaccination. 257,486 have had their second. So more than 50 million injections in total have been given out across the UK. Well, let's get a sort of overview of the international picture with Margaret Harris from the World Health Organization, who joins us now. It's good to see you this morning. Look, first and foremost, can I get your reaction to what we've now seen in this sort of further study coming out of Israel? It's really positive news.
Indeed. Good morning, Stephen. It is positive news. And what's really important about that is the provision of that data. So every country that's vaccinating, if they collect that data, we understand much more about what the vaccines are doing and how we can use them most effectively. The United Kingdom is doing the same thing. We're getting some very interesting and very important informative studies out of the United Kingdom as well.
Meanwhile, we're getting information about the first sort of tweaked vaccine to deal with some of the more concerning variants. I think that's a Moderna vaccine that's been tweaked. I mean, clearly, this in itself is an important step forward, isn't it, as we try to deal with this moving forward?
It's a very important step, but the critical step is bringing down the transmission worldwide. I think you might remember my Director General saying just a couple of days ago that in the last couple of weeks, we've seen the same number of cases as we saw in the first 5 months of the pandemic. So it took 5 months to reach the number of new infections we're now seeing every week. So we're in the most intense phase, even though countries like that in the United Kingdom may not be feeling that right now because you've done such a great job with vaccination and also with the public health and social measures to get your numbers down. But we are actually in a really critical phase. So the most important thing we can do to make sure that vaccine can really fulfill its promise to lead us out of the pandemic is to get the numbers down so that we're not constantly playing catch up with variants.
So how do we do that then in terms of the international response to all of this? Because we need to start viewing it more as a global issue, don't we? But I mean, there's all this pressure to start sending sort of vaccines everywhere. I mean, presumably in some of the countries, they haven't got the infrastructure to deliver the vaccines necessarily as effectively as they need to do. I mean, it's a more complicated picture, isn't it?
You're absolutely right. It's a very complicated picture. But we're seeing some very positive momentum toward vaccine sharing. And we're also seeing positive momentum toward waiving patents so that vaccines can actually be produced where they're needed. On the infrastructure, certainly, actually, no country is perfect. But that's our job, and we with UNICEF work with each country to ensure they can roll out the vaccines. Now, sometimes they also lack the funds to pay the people to roll them out on the spot. So that's why we're also constantly talking about funding. It is critical that we all help each other to make sure that we have the very best vaccine programs possible. But as I said, at the same time, it is also critical that we really maintain and ensure that every country is doing the public health social measures to bring the transmission down so that the vaccine programs can be as effective as possible.
Can I ask what your assessment of the situation in India is? Because, I mean, clearly it is dire at the moment. Clearly the health system there is really struggling to cope. But, I mean, they are vaccinating millions and millions of people. Is the problem just that it is such a huge country?
Well, that's one of the problems. But as I think we've discussed before, if the transmission of this virus gets to such intensity that you're struggling to stop it, if it's really got to the wildfire stage, you have too many people who have got the severe form, and the severe form takes intensive care, it takes intensive use of staff, it means that your hospital beds, your hospital staff are just overwhelmed very rapidly. So that's sadly, horrifically what we're seeing in India. And again, the way to stop it is to step up your finding of all the cases, but get everybody to stop the movement, to do the physical distancing, not to go physically into work if they don't have to, but also support them to be able to stay at home, because a lot of people may be in economic circumstances which makes it impossible for them to simply stay in place.
I mean, clearly there is a divide between those countries, I mean, the wealthier countries generally, who are doing well with this, and those other countries that aren't. Can I ask what is your take on the fact that here in the UK, for example, we're looking at reopening international travel pretty soon, but obviously with quite a lot of caveats and the traffic light system and what have you. Is that a safe thing to do at this time with those caveats in place, or should we be looking to just stay at home at the moment?
Well, certainly with travel, and anyone, I include myself, think about why you're traveling and whether you need to at this point. Now, we have got very detailed technical guidance on how governments can do this. And one of the critical things is what you refer to, knowing the epidemiology in the place that you're going to. Also, the place that you're going to needs to know your epidemiology. The idea being that you don't want to seed an outbreak in another country, but you also don't want to bring it back with you. So it is something that has to be done with great care, with great thought, with excellent planning, and make sure you've got all the things in place, like the ability to test who's coming through, the ability to follow them through either end. And if you're traveling, if you're thinking of traveling for leisure, remember things can change very quickly. We've seen this in this year, so don't be upset if you suddenly find yourself somewhere and you can't get back, or provisions change, because this is a rapidly moving outbreak. It's constantly surprising all of us, and everybody is doing their best and basing their decisions on evidence, but don't expect that a decision is always set in stone. We have to go backwards and forwards with our measures according to what the virus is doing.
Margaret, good to talk to you. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Now, still to come for you this morning, your page has not been found. At 7:30, we'll be talking to an attorney about Facebook's decision to uphold Donald Trump's ban on the social media site. Now, are vaccines more effective than lockdowns? We'll talk to an expert on infectious diseases about this latest COVID data from Israel. That's at 8:20. And I'm going to be talking to a doctor who's helped develop a device that will allow those who suffer with motor neuron disease to communicate. That's at 8:40. Now let's have a look at some of the other stories making the headlines for you this morning. And US President Biden has backed a proposed temporary waiver of intellectual property rights for COVID-19 vaccines, which was put forward by the World Trade Organization and supported by more than 100 other countries. The World Health Organization called it a monumental moment in the fight against COVID-19. Anti-government protests have taken place in Colombia for the 8th consecutive day. Riot police fired tear gas and flashbangs at protesters as they marched on Bogotá's Plaza Bolivar, demanding an end to police abuses and the implementation of social policies in the wake of an economic crisis. The protests have been marred by violence and reported human rights abuses, with some thinking that about 24 people have died so far. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has arrived in Ukraine to show support for the country's response to Russian aggression. Mr. Blinken is going to be talking with President Zelensky during his visit, with the topic of Ukraine's desire to join NATO likely to be discussed. Ukraine is also expected to push for more military aid from the United States amid hostilities from Russian-backed rebels in the country. The online safety group Internet Matters says the level of harm children face online has increased dramatically over lockdown, and the most vulnerable children are most at risk. An Internet Matters report found a 42% increase in children viewing content promoting self-harm or suicide, and a 39% rise in sharing sexual images.
We saw through the pandemic the concern by the government and a number of charities about the increase in child sexual abuse through the pandemic. And certainly, you know, we want to really encourage parents to just revisit those conversations, make sure they've got the right boundaries set up with their children and that they know where they can come and get some help.
Police have seized more than 400 knives and made nearly 1,000 arrests in just 1 week of an anti-knife crime crackdown. Forces across England and Wales started this crackdown on Monday amid concerns over rising levels of violence as lockdown restrictions ease. The Metropolitan Police say machetes and Rambo-style knives are amongst the blades taken. Now, the doctor in charge of NHS England's response to long COVID has told Sky News that dedicated clinics to treat the condition may be needed for much longer than the current funding allows. The chair of the National Long COVID Task Force says the service, which has already been used by thousands of people, could go on beyond April next year if the demand is there. Sky News has filmed inside one of the clinics and spoken to patients who've suffered with the condition for more than a year. Dan Whitehead reports.
More than 12 months on and still recovering. At this long COVID clinic in Bristol, Donna is receiving physio. She has a tight chest and shortness of breath.
This isn't my voice, this is my COVID chest.
Really?
So yeah, I've got a continuation of sort of pressure on the chest and just inflammation, really.
So where would you rate yourself on there?
Donna contracted COVID-19 in March last year, at the start of the pandemic. Her GP referred her through the long COVID clinic system, but she says help wasn't easy to find at first.
I don't think the long COVID clinic's particularly visible, would be my first experience with it. You know, sort of myself and a friend did some research, and then he let me know that he had a referral, so I chased it up with my GP who gave me a referral. So I think particularly there's an issue with visibility.
To improve access, £34 million has now been spent to open 83 clinics across England, the first of which opened last December. NHS England says it doesn't yet have solid figures on how many people have actually used the long COVID clinics. We've seen the numbers of just 5 of the 83, which show more than 2,000 people have already been treated. Those in charge of the clinics say demand could mean the service will be needed well beyond current funding.
So we recognise that, you know, this is a condition that the symptoms can be quite prolonged, and we've already seen that from the patients who got long COVID now about a year ago. Some people are still suffering, so there is that sort of time frame to bear in mind. So that is why additional money has gone in to keep the clinics going for the course of the next year. We suspect it may need to go on for much longer than that.
We now have a clinic called the Long COVID Clinic.
In North Somerset, another referral. Louise's COVID symptoms have lasted more than a year.
Fatigue really is the main thing now. I've got 2 children, a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. And it's just very, very difficult to get through the whole day. I've had to accept it. But yeah, it was a shock to the system.
And what I need you to do is walk on the spot for 40 steps. Okay? Ready, steady, go.
New COVID infections are falling dramatically. Left behind are the so-called long haulers, thousands who may need treatment long after this pandemic has ended. Dan Whitehead, Sky News in Bristol.
Our think tank is calling for urgent reform to the social care sector amid their report's claim of a deep decline in adult welfare. The King's Fund analysis of NHS figures reveals about 120,000 more people requested social care from councils between 2015 to 2016, with 14,000 fewer people actually getting help. Their report highlighted more funding and wider availability of help as ways to improve the sector. The number of people signing up for Open University online courses has surged during the pandemic. The OU says student numbers have gone up 15% this year, with coronavirus being the main reason, as people have looked to upskill and retrain online with the rise of distanced learning. The Royal Mail has revealed images of a set of 12 special stamps being issued to celebrate Sir Paul McCartney. It features a selection of 8 records which have defined his career, from his first solo album in 1970 through to his most recent, which was recorded and released during lockdown. Now, let's see what the weather's going to do for you today. How are we looking today, Naz?
Pretty much like yesterday. It's another cool one today, and there are going to be showery conditions, also some rain and hill snow. You know, typical May conditions.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. Cool and showery conditions once again for today and for tomorrow. And then as we head into the weekend, it does look to become milder, but it is also going to be quite wet and windy, much like Bank Holiday Monday. This morning, it's a fine start. Lots of sunshine. Frosty, though. There are some showers scattered across parts of England and Wales. Patchy rain to the southwest. Rain and hill snow across parts of Scotland. Even some snow down towards low levels. That rain and hill snow will become more showery as it spreads southwards through today to parts of northern England. There may be some heavy downpours with it, though, the risk of hail and thunder. Sunshine and showers for Ireland, Northern Ireland, England and Wales, and patchy rain moving eastwards along southern coastal counties of England. And it's going to be another disappointingly cool day.
Now, Facebook's oversight board has upheld the platform's decision to ban Donald Trump on the site. It follows the company's conclusion earlier this year that Mr. Trump's posts incited violence at the Capitol riots. The former president has branded the decision a total disgrace. Well, let's talk to the co-chief executive of Free Press, Jessica J. Gonzalez, who joins us now. Good to see you this morning. Look, what do you make of this ban and the way it's been enforced?
Listen, I think it was the right decision for Facebook to take Donald Trump off the platform. In fact, I think they took this action way too late. Donald Trump was a serial spreader of hate, lies, and violence over Facebook and other social media platforms. He regularly violated Facebook's community guidelines. He was given a pass time and again because he was the president of the United States. And finally, on January 7th, he was temporarily suspended from Facebook. The oversight board yesterday upheld that suspension, but kicked the ultimate decision about whether the ban should be permanent back to Facebook itself. I wish they would have just taken him down once and for all. Now's the time, but here we are.
So where does that leave your sort of analysis of the responsibilities that Facebook needs to take on board here?
Well, listen, the oversight board said that Facebook had shirked its responsibility when it refused to just ban Trump itself, kicking it over to this board with a set of fairly illusory powers. So, you know, I believe that Facebook shouldn't have platformed Trump long ago. It's made exception after exception. And we know that powerful leaders like Donald Trump, Bolsonaro, Modi have used Facebook to exploit and abuse their citizenry. It's important that Facebook takes a stand here and ensures that world leaders cannot use its platform for authoritarianism and to abuse their citizens.
But it is a difficult situation when you talk about a democratically elected leader being silenced by a private company, in effect. I mean, this is where the lines merge somewhat, don't they?
Listen, this isn't a government, right? This isn't a government trying to shut down speech of its people. This is a private company that has decided that a set of rules are the rules of the road for their company, and that they need to hold to account even powerful leaders. So Donald Trump still has freedom of speech. He started his own website this week. He's, put out a statement that has gotten a ton of press attention. He is welcome to start his own website, welcome to start his own social media platform, but he does not have the power to have reach on a platform that he uses for violence, for abuse, to spread racism, to spread lies about the pandemic and the vaccine, and so forth. He doesn't have that right. That's a privilege. And he hasn't played by the rules, and it was the right decision to take him down.
He's got, obviously, from the desk of Donald J. Trump up and running now. It's effectively a blog, isn't it? But, I mean, he's still getting his thoughts and views out there, and from reading it last night, still as pointed as ever.
That's right. That's right. Again, he's a powerful person with a huge following. He's free to have his own thoughts out there in the world, but there's nothing that requires Facebook to carry his content. The harm here is something I think we really need to talk about. The harm to people who are the subject of Donald Trump's attacks. Here in the United States, Donald Trump ran thousands of ads attacking the immigrant community, attacking Mexicans and brown people. We see a mass shooter show up in El Paso, Texas, with a specific intent to kill Mexicans and immigrants, invoking the same language that Donald Trump invoked. We saw Donald Trump spread lies about the pandemic, call the pandemic a hoax, downplay its effects. And that really has an impact on how people think and behave and our response to a public health crisis like this. Of course, we saw him spread election lies and stir people up to attack the Capitol of the United States with an insurrection. So this is a real threat to democracy. This is a real threat to the health and safety of people around the world.
Okay.
And so we have to really take this seriously.
Yeah, we are out of time, I'm sorry to say. Jessica, good to talk to you this morning. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Now, the Deputy Chair of BAFTA has spoken for the first time about the allegations against award winner Noel Clarke. The actor and producer was recognised just a few weeks ago, despite BAFTA receiving anonymous complaints of abusive behaviour and a letter from producers expressing concern. Now, here's what we know about the decision to honour Noel Clarke last month. And at the end of March, the Academy announced that he would be this year's winner of the Outstanding British Contribution to Cinema. But in the days that followed, BAFTA received anonymous allegations about his conduct, followed by a letter from 3 industry figures who raised third-party allegations against Clarke, as well as anonymous emails with further information. But on the 11th of April, BAFTA proceeded with honouring the actor on the basis that no women had come forward to them with a first-hand account of allegations. 2.5 weeks later, The Guardian published allegations from 20 women against Noel Clarke, and BAFTA responded by suspending the award and his membership until further notice. Lucy Cotter reports.
The one and only Mr. Noel Clarke.
This was Noel Clarke receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award from the British Urban Film Festival in 2019. Just hours after The Guardian last week published allegations of abuse against the actor, he was stripped of the accolade by its founder.
Our association with Noel started and ended when we gave him the honorary award. So when I was aware of the article in The Guardian, I was in complete shock.
Emmanuel Anyamasigwe, whose festival was partnered with BAFTA, has now severed all ties with the organisation for honouring Clarke with an award despite having received anonymous and third-hand allegations against him, and is calling for the chair, Krishnendu Majumdar, to resign.
Krish cannot continue in his post because him being there, him remaining there, just sends completely the wrong signal, because whichever way you look at it, BAFTA have just dealt with this horrendously.
He has done arguably some very good work around diversity. He has been instrumental in turning it around in many ways.
It counts for nothing. It cuts from nothing. I feel completely let down.
They also say that they received no first-hand accounts, and had the victims gone on the record to them, as they did with The Guardian, they would have suspended Noel's award immediately. They wanted first-hand accounts, they say.
But the problem I have with that is, not only are you not meriting the allegations when they first came to you directly through anonymous emails, you're now not meriting this letter that has come from people that you have worked with or dealt with previously at BAFTA. So what are they to make of your kind of reaction to them?
For the first time since news about Clarke and BAFTA broke, BAFTA has given an interview to clarify the timeline of events and defend its decision to proceed with the award.
If we had had one fraction of the information that The Guardian had, we would never have given an award to Noel Clarke. That is obvious, but we didn't have that information. The first time we saw the actual allegations against him was when they were published by The Guardian newspaper. And as soon as we saw the allegations, we suspended the award.
There will be a lot of people listening to this who will say you had heard allegations, even if they weren't first-hand. You were certainly aware that allegations were being made against him.
No, we were aware that people had spoken out against Noel and had made assertions that he had not behaved correctly, but they were very generalised and they were, in the main, totally anonymous. We were never in the position of having a first-hand testimony from anyone about what he had done or when he'd done it.
We've been speaking to the head of the British Urban Film Festival, who has called for the chair of BAFTA, Krish Majumdar, to stand down, to resign, saying that the buck starts and stops with him. What's your response to that?
Krish has worked all the way through together with the board. It has been a joint decision-making process. It is really, I think, not right to single people out.
You stand by both Krish and Amanda Berry to stay in their positions?
Absolutely, yeah.
Whatever the ramifications for BAFTA itself, what is indisputable is that women were too frightened to come forward sooner, leaving huge questions for the industry as a whole. Lucy Cotter, Sky News.
London Science Museum has come under criticism after it was revealed that the sponsor for their new climate exhibition is the oil giant Shell. Environmental activists say they'll call for the exhibition to be boycotted if the company isn't dropped as a major sponsor. Our climate correspondent, Lisa Holland, reports.
London's Science Museum is preparing to reopen after lockdown, with the UK's first exhibition on capturing carbon. The main attraction is a future climate solution. A full-scale mechanical tree brought over from America, it replicates how trees naturally soak up carbon dioxide.
It's widely accepted that technology to capture carbon and store it will be needed for the UK to get to net zero by 2050.
But amongst some contributors, like the climate scientist involved in this display on capturing carbon in woodlands, the excitement of taking part has been overshadowed by learning the exhibition is being sponsored by the oil company Shell.
This sponsorship issue has created a big conundrum for me, because on the one hand, I want to support the exhibition and the key messages of the exhibition, but then on the other hand, I don't want to be associated with sponsorship by big oil companies.
The museum has defended its choice of sponsors.
Actually, we keep complete editorial control of our exhibitions, no matter the sponsor.
So they're actually no sponsor is ever involved in the exhibition per se.
But it's awkward, isn't it, if exhibitors want to distance themselves because of the sponsor that you have?
As I say, we do have complete editorial control.
But that hasn't satisfied climate activists who say they'll call for a boycott of the exhibition if Shell isn't dropped.
For decades, the climate movement have been trying to bring about action on climate justice, on the climate crisis, and also educate the public. And the fact that the Science Museum is accepting a sponsorship is really undermining the work that we've been doing.
Shell says its target is to become a net zero emissions energy business by 2050, and it has a long-standing relationship with the Science Museum, which is planning to open the exhibition in 2 weeks' time. Lisa Holland, Sky News, Central London.
And just to remind you, you can see the Daily Climate Show every weekday at 6:30 and 9:30 here on Sky News. Still to come for you this morning, children's author Michael Rosen shares his experiences of suffering with long COVID.
I'm starting a 10,000 kilometre cycle around the UK, which I'm hoping to complete in 80 days, going from London the whole way to our Tokyo, which we're calling Stokio. Now that things are opening up and we can get out, being outside in the great outdoors is really good for your mental health and your health in general. And hopefully my little journey, people can come and visit me. I've got a website tracking me and the Whole Earth Peanut Butter website. You can go there, find out where I am. If you want to come and join me, come and join me. If you want me to come and camp in your garden or you have a field, I'd love to come along and maybe we can do some outdoor activities together. I'm going to be eating a lot of peanut butter. I might mix it up with some other kind of regional foods around the UK. I don't know, maybe a Bakewell tart with a slathering of peanut butter over the top might be delicious. So I'm going to play around with it. But I have a little pouch here which I have my jar of peanut butter. So hopefully that'll naturally fuel me the whole way to Stokio.
For the early risers.
As we examine the story beyond the headline.
For the knowledge seekers.
Welcome to Divided States.
For the straight talkers, the curious, and the ones who want to be entertained.
Backstage, Sky News' entertainment podcast.
For wherever you are.
Welcome to Sophie Ridge on Sunday podcast.
For the ones who want to know more.
Welcome to the All Out Politics podcast.
For the listeners.
From Sky News Storycast.
Sky News Podcasts. Listen and subscribe for free.
Did you know symptoms of hay fever can develop at any stage of life, not just in childhood? The Pollen Reports, sponsored by Philips Connected Air Purifiers.
Rain and hill snow will spread southwards across Scotland today and then to northern England later, with a risk of hail and thunder too. Meanwhile, some rain may affect southern coastal counties of England. Elsewhere, we'll see scattered showers in between sunny spells, and again, it'll be a cool day everywhere. Currently, tree pollen is airborne, such as birch and oak, as well as plain pollen in some cities. There will be moderate levels of these for today, low across northern parts of Scotland, and spore will temporarily increase after any rain.
The Pollen Reports, sponsored by Philips Connected Air Purifiers.
Now, I've been talking this morning about long COVID, which is all a bit of a mystery. People seem to have different symptoms and no one can quite get to the bottom of it. Well, one person who is really suffering is children's author Michael Rosen, who can join us now. It's good to see you this morning. I know you actually had a really rough time with COVID, didn't you, actually, in the initial stages?
Yes, that's right. I was in intensive care for 47, 48 days. I was in a coma for about 40 of those. So it hit me really badly, yes.
And so coming out of that now, and hopefully people think, well, maybe you'd find some sense of recovery. Again, this long COVID issue has really affected you. What sort of symptoms are you showing with that?
Well, because I got microbleeds in my brain, it knocked out my left eye and left ear. And it seems as if the COVID virus can attack what are called the peripheral nervous system, the edges of ourselves, if you like. So I've got numb toes and I get dizziness quite often. The blood clots, which are also caused by COVID, have cleared up, it seems, in my brain and in my lungs. And then there's a general fatigue because it's thought that the virus, now one of the thoughts, every cell has got a little thing that they call the powerhouse of the cell, the mitochondrion, and they think it probably somehow or other attacks that. That's the little bit in your cell that turns the food into energy. So that seems to be one of the reasons why there's so many symptoms.
So where has this left you in terms of trying to get on with life?
Well, I'm adapting to the fact that I can hardly see, so I can't really see you looking at my screen there. This ear, I have a hearing aid, which sort of gives me a bit of 3D sound, but it's quite strange. It sounds as if I'm always listening to the radio, which, as it happens, I do radio, so it's kind of rather odd. It sounds as if I'm on the radio to myself all the time. And the numb toes are more of an irritant than a sort of, a disability or anything like that, but it is kind of annoying, particularly if I'm walking around in slippers and so on, because it sort of bothers me. But it's the dizziness that surprises me, because sometimes my wife Emma, she sort of notices I kind of stagger against the wall or suddenly grab the table, so that's a bit worrying if I'm out.
Well, what has happened in terms of, in getting a diagnosis for this and the potential for any sort of treatment? Because, with all this, we know people are presenting different, perhaps similar, but still different responses to long COVID. It does seem that getting any sort of actual treatment is extremely difficult.
Well, I think we're coming into the category of what people call post-viral syndrome, so that it's known that viruses of various kinds can have 2, 4, 5, 10, 20 years effect. People talk about ME, obviously, and it's not imaginary. So, people are saying, well, some of it we just have to live with. People who are suffering severe fatigue. Also, other people are suffering what they're calling brain fog. I think I did get that in the first months after I came out of intensive care. I was getting memory loss and getting muddled and fuzzy if there was, as it were, too much information coming at me. There are now some long COVID clinics. I suspect there are some people, I belong to a long COVID group on Facebook. Other social medias are available, that we join and we share some of these. And I can see some people in severe difficulty about literally getting up. Some days they can, some days they can't. I call it alternate day syndrome. If I over-exercise one day, and I do try to exercise a bit every day, then I get a kind of bout of being able to do virtually nothing for a few hours the next day.
What is your message then? Obviously some people are trying to get treatment, and there is talk now that these long COVID clinics are going to have to be around for a lot longer than was initially planned. But is there a sense, with the Facebook groups and all the rest of it, is there a sense that just being able to connect with people who are suffering in a similar way, does that help? Is there a sense of community and mutual support there?
There is. I mean, when I put up the fact that I was getting these bouts of dizziness, up came another whole set of posts of people saying, oh, me too, me too. And then again, I posted up some of the latest stuff that seems to be pointing at the mitochondria, and that somehow or other the virus is getting into the mitochondria. And again, a huge, great wave of posts. Some people are putting up what they find useful, you know, vitamins or other things. And the moment that people are experimenting with that. And the attitude to exercise is little and often, rather than trying to do kind of great big bouts of exercise for, you know, a couple of hours one day and doing nothing for a few days, that doing little and often, and I find that a useful recommendation. But where there are things like severe skin rashes and so on, I get mild skin rash, then, you know, the GP and some medication is necessary. But the fatigue, you know, there's not much you can do about it, but it's actually people younger than me who are trying to get into work 5 days a week. I mean, some of it's being, if you like, disguised because of lockdowns and so on, and people working from home. But there are a lot of people out there who couldn't, if there was full ordinary working conditions, wouldn't be able to work for 5 days a week. It's just, you know, 40 hours. It's too much.
Mm-hmm. Well, look, we really appreciate you sharing your experiences with us, Michael. Good to see you, as always. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks very much.
OK, let's get a quick check on the weather for you now. Here's Naz.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. It's cool and showery once again for today and for tomorrow as well. Then as we head into the weekend, it's going to turn milder, but it's also going to be wet and windy before that. So this morning it's chilly, frosty for many areas, but there's plenty of sunshine to greet many areas this morning. It's a cloudier affair there across parts of central and northern Scotland, some rain and hill snow there, maybe some snow you'll see lying on the ground across parts of Scotland first thing, moving down towards southern Scotland later and to northern England. Most of it light and patchy, but some heavy downpours, some hail still possible, some hill snow as well. Meanwhile, for Ireland, Northern Ireland, England and Wales, it's a case of sunshine and showers today. There's also an area of patchy rain currently across parts of the southwest that will be moving its way eastwards along southern coastal counties of England. Another disappointingly cool day as well.